I couldn't disagree more. Actually, to be truthful, when you're talking about football, the crazy thing about football is it's not done in a back room with calculators. And I respect True Media, but True Media don't draft players. True Media is a nice little asset to tell you what you want. EPA, that's a nice little stat, but when you look at it, you got to take in consideration the entire totality of football. And for so long that we've talked about this, we've boiled down the game of football to fantasy football, numbers, and whose quarterback it is. You walk around the league and watch around the league. Same people told us that Kenny Pickett was the deal.
Everybody's not in everybody's not in the best situation, but there's no excuse. You got to go out there and perform. There's no choice, there's no question. Nobody cares if this was 1 week of prep. Who cares? So a lot of people want to see me fail, and it ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen.
Is he unplayable?
No.
Is he?
Oh, my God.
And
no.
that's the exact point. I think for a lot of Browns fans out there,
he fits right in.
You can't say he's unplayable. Yeah. I can't say he's going to take off and have this tremendous future, but I don't think he's unplayable. So he's not your typical fifth-round guy. I think we've all established that. And then you look at where you're drafting going, do I really want to go up there when I do have all these other needs? This is a tougher conversation.
Shedeur Sanders just shattered everything the NFL has been quietly building for months. While analysts debated draft positions and mock drafts filled every sports page, something far more significant was happening behind closed doors. The league's carefully constructed narrative about quarterback evaluations, team needs, and draft strategy just crumbled in real time. What Shedeur revealed wasn't just about his own journey. It exposed a systematic pattern the NFL has used for decades to control perception, manipulate value, and ultimately determine which players get opportunities and which get buried. The evidence was always there, hiding in plain sight, but nobody connected the dots until now. This isn't speculation or conspiracy theory. This is documented reality that changes how we understand everything about professional football's power structure. When Shedeur Sanders stepped in front of cameras recently, most expected the standard pre-draft platitudes, generic answers about working hard, staying humble, and trusting the process. Instead, he delivered something completely different, a masterclass in exposing institutional control mechanisms that the NFL has perfected over generations. The core of his revelation centered on how the league manufactures narratives around quarterback prospects long before draft day arrives. Shedeur pointed out specific instances where teams publicly expressed concerns about certain quarterbacks, only to draft them high anyway. The disconnect wasn't accidental, it was strategic manipulation designed to control market value and public perception. Think about how this actually works. A team genuinely interested in a quarterback prospect will often leak negative information through trusted media sources. Questions about arm strength, decision-making, or character suddenly dominate the conversation. Other teams start believing the narrative, backing off their interest, and the prospect's draft stock falls. Meanwhile, the team that started the Whisper campaign sits back and watches their target become more affordable. Shedeur experienced this firsthand throughout his college career. Despite putting up elite statistics, winning crucial games, and demonstrating NFL-caliber skills consistently, certain narratives persisted. Too privileged, too comfortable, more celebrity than competitor. These weren't organic observations from scouts doing their jobs. They were coordinated talking points designed to create doubt. Here's where the exposure gets devastating. Shedeur backed up his claims with something the NFL hates dealing with: undeniable statistics that contradict their preferred narratives. His completion percentage, touchdown to interception ratio, performance under pressure, and decision-making metrics all ranked elite level compared to recent successful NFL quarterbacks at the same stage. Yet media coverage consistently focused elsewhere. How many times did you hear about his famous father instead of his fourth-quarter performances? How often did discussions center on Colorado's defense rather than Shedeur's ability to overcome those defensive limitations through exceptional play? This pattern isn't unique to Shedeur. The NFL has historically used similar tactics with quarterbacks who don't fit their preferred mold. Whether due to background, personality, playing style, or circumstances, certain prospects get tagged with narratives that stick regardless of evidence contradicting them. The league maintains this control through relationships with media members who depend on NFL access for their careers. When league sources suggest a particular angle on a prospect, media members amplify it. Not because they're dishonest, but because access is currency in sports journalism. Challenge the narrative too aggressively, and suddenly your calls don't get returned. Shedeur's most damaging revelation involved how the pre-draft process actually functions versus how it's presented to the public. We're sold this image of meticulous evaluation, where teams exhaustively study every prospect, conduct thorough interviews, and make calculated decisions based purely on football merit. Reality looks completely different. Teams often make decisions about prospects months before the draft based on organizational preferences, coaching staff comfort levels, and front office politics. The extensive evaluation process becomes performance theater, going through motions to justify predetermined conclusions. Consider the Wonderlic test, physical measurements, and interview questions that dominate pre-draft coverage. Shedeur pointed out how arbitrary these metrics become when actual game performance contradicts them. A quarterback scores poorly on a cognitive test, but demonstrates elite processing speed on film. The test score gets emphasized. Another quarterback measures shorter than ideal, but shows exceptional pocket presence and field vision. Height concerns dominate the conversation. This selective emphasis allows teams to control narratives around prospects they want to either elevate or diminish in public perception. The evaluation process isn't about finding truth, it's about constructing justification for decisions already made. What makes Shedeur's exposure particularly significant is how he connected these narrative games to economic reality. Quarterback contracts represent massive financial commitments for NFL teams. Controlling the draft narrative directly impacts rookie contract values and long-term salary cap implications. When a quarterback's perceived value drops due to manufactured concerns, the team that drafts him gains leverage in contract negotiations. Lower draft position means smaller guaranteed money and more team-friendly contract structures. This isn't coincidental. It's intentional economic strategy disguised as football evaluation. Shedeur revealed conversations and interactions that demonstrated how aware teams are of this dynamic. Scouts would privately praise his abilities, while publicly their organizations expressed reservations. The disconnect wasn't confusion, it was coordination. This exposure extends beyond individual draft manipulation. Shedeur identified a systemic pattern in how the NFL maintains control over player value throughout careers. Rookie contracts, franchise tags, restricted free agency, every mechanism serves to limit player leverage while maximizing team control. The narrative manipulation during draft season represents just the beginning of this system. Once players enter the league, similar tactics continue. Contract negotiations get leaked to media in ways that frame players as greedy or teams as reasonable. Performance gets contextualized through whatever lens serves league interests. Quarterbacks face particular scrutiny because their contracts impact salary cap space so dramatically. Keeping quarterback salaries suppressed benefits every team in the league, creating collective incentive to maintain systems that limit player leverage. Timing makes Shedeur's revelation particularly explosive. We're witnessing increasing player awareness about these dynamics. Social media gives athletes direct communication channels to fans, bypassing traditional media gatekeepers. Players can now challenge narratives immediately, rather than suffering in silence. The NFL has responded by tightening control where possible, restricting player social media during certain periods, emphasizing media training, and applying pressure on players who speak too candidly. but the information asymmetry that previously gave teams overwhelming advantage is narrowing. Shedeur's willingness to expose these mechanisms represents a generational shift. Previous players might have complained privately, but maintained public decorum. Today's athletes increasingly refuse to accept systems designed to exploit them, even when speaking out carries professional risk. Perhaps most telling was how the NFL ecosystem responded to Shedeur's exposure. Rather than addressing the substance of his claims, responses focused on attacking his credibility. He was characterized as entitled, ungrateful, or naive about how the business works.
This reaction pattern is itself revealing. When institutions can't refute accusations, they attack accusers. The substance gets ignored because engaging honestly would require admitting uncomfortable truths. Some media members who built careers on access to NFL sources suddenly discovered concerns about Shedeur's maturity or understanding of the process. These weren't organic journalistic conclusions, they were defensive reactions protecting the system that provides their livelihoods. Shedeur Sanders didn't just expose one draft cycle's manipulation, he revealed fundamental truths about power structures in professional football. The league operates through careful narrative control, selective information distribution, and economic mechanisms designed to maximize organizational leverage over players. This exposure doesn't immediately change those structures. The NFL remains an enormously powerful institution, with sophisticated systems protecting its interests. But transparency creates accountability pressure over time. Once patterns become visible, they become harder to maintain. Other players are watching. Other prospects are learning. The blueprint for how the NFL controls narratives and manipulates value is now documented by someone living through it. That knowledge spreads and empowers future players to recognize and resist these tactics. The real question isn't whether Shedeur's exposure was accurate. The evidence supports his claims too thoroughly for serious dispute. The question is whether this moment represents the beginning of meaningful change in how the NFL operates, or whether the system proves resilient enough to absorb this challenge and continue functioning as before. What Shedeur Sanders exposed was never meant to become public knowledge. The NFL's power depends partly on these mechanisms remaining invisible, or at least deniable. Now they're neither. The narrative they didn't want you to see is fully visible. What happens next will determine whether exposure leads to accountability or simply becomes another chapter in professional football's complicated relationship with truth and power.